how lucky were you to have a mentor who took you through that process? Not all of us have, and so I hope you could share some of the experience you learned from him. What do you think the motivations are, and what do you see as the motivations for board service? Why do people do it?
Well, I think there are a number of different motivations from giving back to the community perspective. You know, it's a lot of people are just inclined to do good and help others. So from a nonprofit standpoint, I think it's very fulfilling to serve in that capacity. It from a developmental standpoint, it stretches your skills in new ways. It's one thing to be in a corporate environment where there's a formal hierarchy and rules of engagement, but when you do nonprofit board work, you have people around the table from all walks of life, from various points of view, and it teaches you how to collaborate with people who are not necessarily like-minded for a common purpose, which is also a wonderful skill to have. It provides you with an avenue to network with other individuals and expand your own personal community. I found some very rewarding friendships and relationships through board service that people I would not have normally met at that point in time. And then if you're talking about a for-profit scenario, then there's the benefit of really learning about good governance, good corporate governance. There's potentially compensation involved with that, so that might be a motivation for people. And it helps you continue your career even past the point in time when you're a formal executive, to be able to have a second phase of your career, and sometimes that's somebody's motivation as well.
Great, great. So my background is in the nonprofit field, and I know a lot about different types of boards in the nonprofit field, whether they're charity boards, arts institutions, religious institutions, universities. Plus there's professional organizations that are membership organizations, foundations. What are some of the considerations when choosing a nonprofit board?
I would encourage you first and foremost to follow your passion. The for-profit boards should be filled with people who really are passionate about the cause. There are so many wonderful causes out there and ways to give back. I often personally have been engaged in work around diversity and women and children's issues and giving back to the community, and that has been represented by the boards I serve on. More recently, I've gotten involved with areas where I'm a hobbyist and I want to learn more personally, which is why I'm involved with the Botanic Gardens. So there's different reasons, but you should have that type of connection to the organization to really give it your all.
Great. And so we're presuming that the 70 people who are on the conversation with us today are motivated, and that's why they want to find out about it. So we're going to do some level setting and just understand the different types of boards and what is available. When you serve on a nonprofit board, is that compensated work or what is the compensation?
It's usually not compensated. It's a rare exception when it would be. It really is about giving your time and your talents and treasures to an organization that will benefit from it because of that passion, your particular knowledge of an area that they could benefit from because they are a nonprofit institution and wouldn't be necessarily paying for your expertise, and also about fundraising. To be honest with you, a lot of times nonprofits are looking to tap into your own personal network to help them with their fundraising efforts.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's just segue a little bit and talk about for-profit boards. What are the different types that you would find there?
Well, The way I'd characterize the different types are primarily around ownership structure, and each have some unique characteristics, but there are private boards where you either have a private equity ownership, or you have a family ownership, or an ESOP, employee owned, and those type of companies are looking at certain objectives. In the case of a family board, it might be preserving, their investment, and or growing it. In cases of private equity, there's usually a certain hold period that they will own their portfolio companies before exiting the investment, and they're trying to make things happen sooner rather than later to be able to meet those financial targets. And then if you consider public company boards, there's an extra layer of regulation and requirements that need to be satisfied for public disclosure, and a different level of governance that's needed in connection with that.
And Suzanne, is that work compensated?
Yes, it usually is compensated, and at different levels. It depends a lot on the ownership structure, on the size of the organization, on, to be honest with you, how prestigious the board is, and how much visibility the board has. Sometimes a function of the challenges that they're facing as well, and the level of expertise and time commitment that's necessary to do the board role justice.
So as our participants on the call here consider which path they want to go down, what's the decision tree that you would use to decide whether to go in the nonprofit arena or for-profit? And is there one?
Well, Gail, I personally don't think of it as either or. I think of it as kind of a stage of life issue to a certain degree. How much time you have to commit to an organization, and personally, I think that at some point in your career you should be thinking about doing both. If you haven't served on a board, a nonprofit board is a great way to get the lay of the land on how a board operates, the protocols associated with that, how you partner with other board members. One of the biggest challenges for a first-time board member, nonprofit or for-profit, is realizing you're a board member and not an executive or a member of management. And so how you conduct yourself in the boardroom is really important to provide advice, but not necessarily do. That's somebody else's job. And they can take your advice or not take your advice, so you're there to counsel. So learning how to operate as a board member, nonprofits are a great place to start. After you have those experiences, at some point in your career, people may want to think about a for-profit board. Usually that comes a bit later in career, because you've accumulated a certain amount of expertise, and you're the subject matter expert on that to bring to a board in a particular situation. And then the market is more competitive too. It's often a lot easier to get on a nonprofit board than it is a for-profit. But we're seeing some of the trends today indicate that the for-profit boards are willing to reach down lower in the organization than they have before, particularly for diversity candidates. So we see some of those trends indicating that people mid-career at least are getting a shot at for-profit boards. And then at a later stage of your career, if you've exited your executive role, then it may be appropriate to develop a portfolio of boards and only boards. Often, if you're an employed executive, you can usually only sit on one for-profit board at a time because they want you to do your day job as well. And even with that, I encourage all people that I speak with about boards to make sure they've talked to their board and their CEO of their current employer to make sure that they have permission to serve on the for-profit board, because that's not always the case as well. So it's heavily dependent on how much experience you've had on the boards and kind of what stage of your career you're at a given point.
Great, and I think you made a lot of great points in there. The one I really want to underline as somebody who's run organizations and search for board members is you're looking for the expertise and the experience of a leader, but when they get in the boardroom, their leadership skills are not necessarily the ones you need them to have in transitioning from being a good leader to being a great board member is two separate sets of skills. So I really appreciate your saying that, and I want to underline it. So as a company, a nonprofit, a for-profit, and a foundation seeking their next great board member, what would they be looking for?
Well, often we work with clients to put together what we call a skill gap matrix. So this is a list of all of the skills and experience that their current board members bring to bear. And then we map that to the strategic plan of the organization and say, okay, where are there strategic or governance gaps in your board today that by putting somebody with that particular experience or that particular situation that they faced in the past, they can provide expertise that you don't have today to help further your strategic plan and accelerate it. And that's often how we come up with the board profiles for individuals, unless somebody is retiring and there's an obvious gap left by that person's retirement. We do that type of upfront planning. And so finding a board member is often, I tell people, about kind of putting a round peg in a round hole. The company is facing a particular situation, and they want an expertise to be able to plug into that and be able to advise them on that particular situation. It could be market-based with industry knowledge. It could be regulatory. It could be litigation. It could be where they are in the life cycle of the company. Whatever that is, they're looking for somebody who can bring that to bear. And so usually most board profiles are written in that fashion.
And I want to echo what you're saying. Even in small nonprofits, they're looking to fill the skills gap, not only on their board, but what they might have on staff. So it might be HR expertise or legal expertise, IT expertise. So that it depends on the organization, but I think they all, large or small, share that way of looking at how to recruit their board members. So how as somebody seeking to join a board, how do I present myself? Well, how do I take my skill set and make it appropriate for the boards in which I might be interested in serving?
Well, I'll speak to two different ways. I think for the nonprofit board, a lot of that is about doing your homework on what type of organizations you would like to be affiliated with. And then expanding your network to either existing board members or the CEO to let them know of your interests. Many nonprofits are regularly looking for board members and want to be aware of people who are interested. So that's probably the easiest way to connect, particularly in the Chicagoland community. You mentioned in the introduction that I was on the board of Leadership Greater Chicago. fantastic organization of civic leaders. They actually keep a repository of nonprofit board opportunities for the community that you can tap into and see what type of opportunities are available. There are many other organizations like that here in Chicago. On the for-profit board side, it's a little different. Many times people think about board service being an extension of their executive career, and really what companies are looking for in board members is the cumulative expertise you've built over your entire career. What are the 2, 3, 4 things that where you've developed your own personal brand and reputation and are considered a subject matter expert? And we often advise people to actually build a separate board resume that's different than your executive resume to highlight your value proposition on a board. Why are you the subject matter expert, in which disciplines that really stand out, and then put an explanation under that in terms of how you've accumulated that expertise, and then the chronology of your career. But board service is really about having enough experience at that point in time to be the expert that the company needs given their current situation, and positioning yourself that way. Then, after you have that together, firms like Spencer Stewart and there are others out there that do board work will readily take your information, your resume, and get to know you. And then when the time comes, if there's a board opportunity, we'll reach out to you. The other, especially for smaller boards, for private boards, I tell people, look into your friends and family program. Figure out who in the community knows those organizations and may not hire an executive search firm to help them with their board placement. They might be just asking their friends, who do you know who has this set of experiences? And
Right.
That's a great way, particularly for your first board.
Right. And when you mention the search process and looking for the board you might be interested in, I know in the nonprofit world, good governance says that there are term limits, and we're always looking to bring in new board members. So it's a churning process. There might be a junior board or a ladder of experience that you could go through. Is it the same in the for-profit world?
There it is, but it varies. And some boards don't have term limits. Some boards don't have age limits. Others do. So it's really a function of the particular company and what they've decided. We've done some work with boards that have actually annual performance reviews. And if you're not holding up your end of the deal in terms of being an active board member, you're moved off after a year. The vast majority, however, it's a different type of commitment than an executive role as well. Often when companies are looking for board members, they're thinking about it as a longer term relationship. So there's a lot more vetting that goes in on the chemistry of the individual, how they're going to interact with the other board members, how the dynamic might change or be enhanced by adding this person to the board, and the process usually takes longer as a result. I tell people a lot of dinner meetings where you're sitting there getting to know people as people, because you have to spend all day together, several times a year working through tough issues. So you want to make sure everybody gets along. Yeah. And then think about it as a 10, 15, in some cases 20-year commitment, unless something happens to the company where beyond their control, the company is sold or somehow it's dissolved. There are very few reasons why somebody would leave a board after making a commitment, unless they're just pressed for time and have to resign.
Right. So I've monopolized the questioning. We had some questions submitted online before we start. I'm going to start there. And if anybody has questions they want to either put in chat or ask live, if you could get ready, I'm going to ask you a few that were submitted previously. Bill Hellenberg asks, does nonprofit board experience enhance your prospects for recruitment to a for-profit board, or are the two different?
I would say that it can't do anything but help to have a nonprofit experience before for-profit. Like I said, it's a bit like a for-profit board on training wheels in terms of teaching the process of governance and the protocols and the behaviors, et cetera. So that definitely is additive. I know that when I'm presenting a first-time for-profit board member, our clients will look at the nonprofit experience, and that does count, and they recognize that. So if you haven't done a nonprofit board in the past, I'd encourage you to start there, and it's a great start towards a path to a board career.
Great. Brad Johnson asks, what if you've joined a board and it isn't what you've expected?
Well, like I said, there are different reasons that people leave boards. I counseled a friend recently who had found himself in this situation, and you have to understand, I guess, first and foremost, make sure you're doing a lot of due diligence on the boards that you join. As a matter of course, their financials, their strategic plan, particularly if it's for-profit, you have a responsibility and a liability as a director when you join them. So you want to make sure you fully understand what you've gotten yourself, into going in. That being said, there are always things that we can't do due diligence on that just come up as a matter of course or something unexpected. You can resign from a board, and as long as you do it for a good reason that is explainable, it should not inhibit your ability to join other boards going forward, but encourage you to have that documentation and to really understand what commitments you made up front, and do it without burning any bridges in the process, to make sure everybody's very clear in terms of why you've chosen to leave the board.
Great. Alan Cohn has asked, how do you manage your disagreements with the direction the board is going?
So I will assume that this is as if you were a board member, and the rest of the board is thinking differently than you are. So I'll read a little bit into that question, but assuming that's the case, you as a board member have an obligation to professionally disagree with other points in view. In fact, in a number of boards I've been associated with and have consulted with, there is very robust discussion on disagreements where people are going back and forth, but it's always in a very professional way, getting people's point at the table. If you're on a for-profit board, that's what they're paying you for, is your expertise on a particular topic. At the end of the day, there's usually a vote taken on specific matters and those of importance, and you make your case, and then you get behind the decision that was made. If it's something that I would say is in a gray area, relative to ethics, or other issues that could harm the company in some way, then that's a different situation, and there's all different ways to go about that, and won't get into those details. But assuming that it's not, just be vocal in your opinion and your expertise, and make sure that it's shared.
Great. I'm going to take a second and see if Caroline is there. If we could take questions live from the audience, if anybody wants to unmute themselves and have their video going, we'll take some live questions now. And we'll give that a minute.
Hi, this is Bridget Anderson from the class of 2008. Can you hear me?
We can,
Yes,
Bridget.
we can, Bridget.
Wonderful presentation. I have a question about the role of boot camps or training programs for people who are interested in joining boards. A couple of these opportunities have come by my way the last couple of years. Usually they're kind of, multi-week intensives, or sometimes they're spread over the course of several months. And I'd love to get your opinion around how we should parse out the value proposition of some of these boot camps, in particular those that are targeted toward corporate or independent boards, to see if they are worth your time. Is it better if they're affiliated with an executive recruiter? Is it better if they're affiliated with an academic institution? Or if it's just, an organization that sort of gathers, women that want to be on boards? How do you vet the right opportunity for someone's time and money?
Great, thank you, Bridget.
It's a wonderful question, and there are a lot out there. I'm familiar with several that are associated with academic institutions that have targeted specifically women, for example, as board members, and actually attended one a number of years ago. I think the interesting thing is finding out whether or not like-minded people will be attending. I found one of the greatest benefits was the network that I built through that process, both at the institution as well as the other women who had joined that. And also kind of their position on furthering that relationship post the planned sessions. You almost become an alumni of those organizations and keep in touch, and there's a lot of value add there as well. There are other organizations, Catalyst, if you're not familiar with them. I'm speaking primarily to women-oriented programs, and that's not the intent here, but just as an example. They have a coaching and consulting service to help with women positioning themselves on boards, and then they will actually help you find boards as well. So you want to understand how long that value proposition to your question lasts, and what the return is on that. Women Corporate Directors is another organization. You have to be a member of a board to join that, and those are more senior level women. But there are organizations like that aren't a classroom style boot camp, if you will, but regular monthly meetings. We're talking about board related issues that are top of mind and very relevant, and comparing and contrasting notes. So a number of different ways to get educated on board topics.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bridget. And let me ask, Suzanne, there's a number of questions that have come in on this theme. Nelson has asked it, and Vivek has asked, what about liability insurance? And what are the liabilities if you're a board member?
Great question. So I would encourage anybody considering a for-profit organization to ask the company about their DNO insurance coverage, director and officer insurance, and the amount of insurance is really a function of the size of the organization, and like I said, when you're doing your due diligence, what you see as the risks associated with the organization, either from a litigation standpoint, financial, et cetera. Usually most companies will offer their board members a certain size policy, and it's not necessarily negotiable, but they think it's right sized for the situation. But definitely always ask about it.
And I want to clarify, if they carry DNO, you're automatically covered. You don't have to opt in.
If you become a board member. Now, not to get into kind of estate and financial planning, but as an individual too, you may want to carry another umbrella policy on your personal assets as well, just to make extra sure. But the company should provide the DNO insurance.
Absolutely, great. Kathy Bell asked, how important is it for a board member in a not-for-profit to make a large donation?
It's a great question as well. It really depends on the nonprofit. I know here in the Chicagoland area, there are some nonprofits that I'm familiar with that have a suggested donation level, but it's not a requirement of the board. There are other boards here in Chicago that may require a $25,000 or $50,000 annual donation just to sit on the board. Some of the more prestigious boards. So it depends where you're shooting. Usually, a lot of nonprofit boards have what they call a give or get policy, which would mean that either you personally give a donation, or you're able to leverage your network to assemble a donation from other people's giving, and you help organize that on behalf of the organization.
Absolutely, and my experience is that if that's not a conversation that's had at the beginning of the process, make sure to ask that question, because the worst is when there's a surprise after you join and you find out you're expected to buy a table or the equivalent at their annual gala for $5,000. So one of the main things that non-for-profit boards do is fundraise for the organization. So that should be an explicit conversation. If it's not had with you, you should ask that question.
And many times the nonprofit nominating and governance committee members who would be looking at the selection of board members or the CEO will have a 1 or 2 pager that lists the requirements of being a board member. Always ask for that, because there are other considerations besides just the financial piece as well, in terms of the number of meetings you attend and how else you participate in the community as well.
Absolutely, all of the obligations you want to know before you sit down. Great. More questions if anybody wants to turn on their video and their audio and ask at this point. And if not, I'm going to take the opportunity. If you do want to ask, you can put it in the chat. I'm going to keep going. Joyce,
Gail, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but it looks like Ken Chan has a question.
Yes. Hi, this is Ken. I'm class of 2005. I had a question about if you're on a not-for-profit board and you find out that your executive director has values that sort of hinder what the purpose of the not-for-profit is. So I'll be more specific. I'm on a not-for-profit for a transitional housing group that supports women in transitional housing, a sober house. And I recently found out that the executive director is transphobic. And so I'm really struggling because we have a very limited number of beds in my city to house women who need transitional housing. So I understand that, you know, this organization is really important, but I am really struggling knowing that our executive director would try and turn away somebody who was trans if she was in need of housing.
Thank you for your question, Ken.
You know, it's really a challenge when something like that happens, and I've spoken with a number of friends who have been in similar situations, and unfortunately, where there's a disconnect between your values and what you find leadership believes. One of the most important roles of being a board member, and this is true for nonprofit and for-profit, is the evaluation of the CEO. The CEO technically reports into the board, or the executive director reports into the board, and making sure that there is alignment. You know, I don't want to go too far down this path, but if you have that concern, I would share that with the other board members. and talk about the implications of that. But the board is responsible for making sure that they have the right leadership in place for the organization. And that's one of the most important jobs they do.
Absolutely. And I'm going to ask the last question as we get ready to close up our time. Thomas Gowlick asked, I'm recently retired after 40 years as a financial executive for a number of small and mid-sized companies. I'm interested in hearing about the strategies to secure a board position at a for-profit organization.
Sure. So there are different types of board positions, and I'd refer all of you to, if you haven't been to our website, we create an annual publication called the Spencer Stewart Board Index. The one out there right now is 2019, and we're going to be publishing 2020 shortly. It has fantastic data in it in terms of the type of roles that are filled within public company boards by function, by age, by demographic, and as well as some other great insights just in terms of trends in board governance. The financial arena is an interesting one because often a company will have a CFO, and that person sits on on the board meetings, even though they're not part of the board. But oftentimes, we're asked to find a board member who can be viewed as a financial expert on a board, and particularly for publicly traded companies, that's one of the requirements, is that they have financial experts on the board. So understanding better what those requirements are and how you map to those requirements would be my first suggestion as a finance executive. And then understanding and putting together your board resume relative to the set of experiences in your respective industry, and targeting the companies that you think would be most likely to have board succession as a near-term agenda item.
Great. Suzanne, I can't thank you enough for being with us today. This might be the start of a long conversation. I think it was tremendously helpful, and the amount of interest this shows you what a great topic it is. Just want to encourage everybody to follow the Chicago Booth Alumni Club on Facebook, on LinkedIn, to look at all the upcoming program. The next program we'll have in this series is on October 29th, when Fritz Kege is going to join us, our Cook County assessor, to talk about big data, tax assessment, and social inequity. So that's going to be an interesting one. Looking forward to it. Thank you all. You can find both of us on LinkedIn if you want to follow up any further. Thanks for your time, Suzanne. It was really great.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay.